Hey, welcome back to our GIS videos. We're picking up where we left off in the previous one. So we had just finished making our basin polygons after we made a basin raster file, which all started from our Spring Creek and our Spruce Creek DEMs that we mosaiced together in the first video. So if you're just continuing along here with us, we're going to basically edit out all of the shape files except the one for Spring Creek watershed boundary. And then we're going to clip the mosaiced DEM to that watershed boundary as well as the NHD flow lines. So we basically in the end want to have a map for the Spring Creek watershed that shows the digital elevation model as well as the stream network. So the first thing that we're going to do is turn on our editor tool because that will allow us to edit away all of the different shape files on the Basin Polygon layer that we don't want. So since we have a couple of different files up on our table of contents here, we need to make sure we tell GIS which one we want to edit from. And here I've called my Basin Polygon layer Basin Poly, and so I'm going to click on that. And next, what I'm going to do is use the select tool to select the layer that I want to keep, which seems counterintuitive, but it's much better than selecting by hand 1039 shapefiles that I don't want to save. So if I click on that, you'll see it gets selected. And then I can go into the attributes table for the Basin Polygon shapefile. And there's an option here to switch selection. So since I have the one that I want to keep selected, if I switch the selections, then I'll be able to get rid of all the ones that I want to delete. So if I click on that and then click this highlighted X, if for some reason you don't see this highlighted and available to be clicked on, it's because your editor tool's not on. So if for some reason you don't see this, just go back and turn on your editing tool and then you'll see it again. So then we can click on that X and you'll see we're just left with one polygon. So I'll go ahead and close the attributes table. And for some reason, you need to click it off and then back on again in order to see that it's worked correctly. But you can see now, basically, we're just left with the one polygon shapefile that we do want to keep for Spring Creek. And so now we can go ahead and stop editing and save the edits since we are sure it's working correctly. And the next thing we want to do is have the filled DEM layer. So I'll bring that up. We want to be able to clip that DEM to our Spring Creek watershed boundary. So for those of you who remember, we have the data management tools, and we need to go under raster and then raster processing and clip to find the clipping tool for the raster files. And since our DEMs are a raster file, we need to find the clipping tool that works for rasters. So I'll go ahead and click on that. And we can use the filled DEM as our input raster. The output extent is the Basin Polygon layer. And so if you think about this as like the cookie dough and the cookie cutter, so you're putting the cookie dough first, so that's your input raster file, the filled DEM, and the cookie cutter is the shape that you want to cut the cookie dough to, right? So it's a silly analogy, but I think it works. So start with the cookie dough and then use the cookie cutter as the output extent. If you check this box that says use input features for clipping geometry, then you won't get this weird rectangle around your shape. You'll have clipped exactly to the space and extent boundary, which will be your polygon. So that's what we want to do. And then we can specify where we want to save our file. And this is going to be Spring Creek DEM, and we need our .tiff extension. So go ahead and save that. And then we can click OK, and it should crank through. So we'll give that a moment. And when it's created, it'll revert back to its original sort of black and white color. So we'll have to change the color scheme again. But you can see that worked. And now we have just the ranges for the elevations that are within the watershed boundary. So if we want to click on the color ramp and get that to be inverted again, then we'll have the high points as blue, or the high points as red, and the low points near the streams as blue. Okay, so let me go ahead and zoom in a bit on our watershed here and get rid of some of the layers we don't need. So if you are following along, you probably still have your basin raster, which we don't need anymore, your flow direction raster, which we don't need anymore. We needed that to get our polygons. We have this mosaic DEM, but we corrected it when we filled it, so we don't need that one anymore either. And these were our original source files. So if I get rid of those, we won't have those anymore either. But what I want to bring back is our NHD flow lines, because we want to be able to have the stream network show up on our map, since that's going to be a useful thing to do in hydrology. So we need to go back to wherever you have your National Hydrography data saved. So mine happens to be in my Lecture 8 folder, since that's the first lecture where we saved this data. And so I'm going to go ahead and navigate to that, and I'll add my NHD flowline shapefile and also NHD flowline 2, but I'll just start with one because they're both kind of big. So if we start with one and then add the other, they'd be a little bit better for the computer memory. So that's cranking through. You can see some of the streamlines emerge, but they're a little bit sporadic. So we need the second layer as well in order to have the full streamlines here. So I'll go ahead and add those. And you can kind of see now we've got our full streamlines visible on our map, but they're two different layers. So we could either merge them together first and then clip them to the watershed boundary. But since these two NHD flowline layers are pretty big, I found it to be easier to clip them first individually and then merge the two clipped files together. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's remember that they are shape files. So if we want to clip shape files, we have to go under Analysis Tools, extract, and then clip. And then you can feed in the input features. So that will be our two NHD flow lines. So I'll just pick the first one first, NHD flow line. And then our clip features is going to be the Basin Polygon layer. And then you just have to specify where you want to save it. So I'm just going to call this stream clip. And it'll give the dot shape extension. And it'll take a moment, but it should clip those NHD flow lines down to just within this watershed boundary. So you can see it's cranking away across the bottom there. And so while I'm waiting for it to work, I'll go ahead and pause my video and come back in a moment when it's done. Oh, wait, let's see. Oh, looks like it just worked. So I'm not going to bother pausing the video because I think we're in good shape here. All right, so we've got the green checkbox. So yay, that worked. So let's go ahead and do the second one. But since we know our computer is getting a little bit slow with all this high resolution flow lines, I'm just going to remove that first one from our layers so that we don't have to worry about that one anymore. And now we can go ahead and clip the second one. So we'll put flow line 2 as our input features. And clip features is going to be our watershed boundary, so we'll pick that. And again, we need to specify where this gets saved. And I'm just going to call this clip2, stream clip2.shapefile. And we'll let that crank through. And then we'll be able to basically merge those two shape files together. And since they're shape files, we call it merging. When they're DMs or raster files, we call it mosaicing. So just a difference in technicalities here. So it looks like that worked. Awesome. Yay. So we've got our stream network. Let's go ahead and turn off and remove the original NHD flow line. So you can see we've got our stream networks just within our watershed boundary now. So awesome. Now we can merge those together so that we just have the one stream file layer. So for that, we need to go into data management tools. And instead of being tempted to go down further, like we usually do for many of the other tools we use, we just need to go down to general and then find where it says merge and input our two shape files, which are the clipped streams. And then specify our new name. And since this is Spring Creek, I'll call it Spring Creek Streams. That might be too long of a name. Let's see. Let's just do it like that. All right. If you remember, GIS doesn't like names that are longer than 13 characters. So if you ever run into that problem, just try changing your name and making it shorter and see if that fixes any errors you're running into. Okay, so we just merged our two stream files. So we can go ahead and remove the original layers from the map so we don't get confused or take up too much memory for those things to keep redrawing. And I have no idea what color your GIS decided to make your streams layer, but let's go ahead and choose a blue color. So I find dark navy looks nice on top of the colors that we've picked for the DMs. And I'll go ahead and make it a width of 2, just so I can see the stream network well. All right, so that looks perfect. The one last thing we need to do is clip the DEM to our watershed boundary. And if you remember, our DEMs are a raster file. So we need to go down into the raster tools again and find raster processing, clip. And we can input our DEM, which we had been using before as our filled DEM. So we got rid of all those sort of low imperfections already. So we want to, and actually I think we may have already done that. Let's see, if I turn off the filled DEM, yep. So we are good. If you need to see that clipping again, I'll go into raster processing, clip, and you can feed in your original DEM and specify the output extents as the polygon. So remember the cookie dough and the cookie cutter analogy, and click on where it says use input features for clipping geometry to clip exactly to that Basin Polygon layer, and then specify your name. And we've already done that. So I have my Spring Creek DEM ready to go. It's going to give me an error because I already have that saved. So I think you should be all set. And if you want to see this zoomed out a little bit more, we can do zoom to layer and get that centered. If you right click on the layer you want to center, and then you're all set. The only other thing I would recommend doing is changing some of these names so that they show up nicely in your legend. So some of the things we can do are rename our streams layer. This is going to be our watershed boundary. And this is our elevations. And if you remember, these elevations are in feet. So we can go ahead and specify the units. And then if you want to make your map, because at this point you're sort of ready for your map to be finalized, we can switch over to the view at the bottom here. That's our layout view. And you'll see you'll basically get a sheet of paper here that you would be printing that on. And I prefer to have this be in landscape orientation. It just makes the map look nicer because it doesn't feel so squished on a portrait view. So I'll change this to letter landscape under the traditional layouts. And then you'll see we basically have everything we need here. We can move our legend, which looks nice since we renamed all those files with sort of real names instead of just whatever we were calling the names of the files while we were creating them. And here we can call this Spring Creek elevation map. Since we've got our DEM here, hit OK. And here's our teensy little north arrow. We can put in the corner and make it a little bit bigger. And then your scale, oh my goodness, there's no way anybody could read that. So let's move our scale over a bit and make that bigger. And it's in decimal degrees. I think probably it would be better if we gave units that more people are familiar with. So let's go ahead and change the units to miles. Since our elevations are feet, it would be best for consistency if we keep in these English units. So let's go ahead and use miles for our units on our scale. And then we can pick the format that we want. I prefer one of these alternating ones up here. So if we do that, just be careful, mine reverted back to kilometers. So I need to go back and change my units again. Just make sure they're in miles and hit apply. Okay, and that looks great. So if I zoom in a little bit, should be able to see sort of the full extent of this map. That's maybe a little too far. Let me try 75%. So that looks good. So you can see the name of the map, the north arrow, the scale, the legend, which has all the beautiful names on it for the different layers, it has our units for the elevation. And I'll just go ahead and add my name so that when somebody's grading my map, they know who created it. All right, so I think that's everything we need to do. Just go ahead and zoom out a little bit so you can see that full scale. And of course, if you wanted to export this as a PDF or an image file, you can go into File and Export Map, and you'll be able to save the way that you want to export it. So here we've been doing TIFF files for most of class. So we can call this Spring Creek, map. and that will save our file as a TIFF image. And then you can use this wherever you need to. All right, sounds great. Nice work, everybody.